the Europeans coming to the Caribbean, there was resistance. And there was resistance of all types. Some resistance I've heard described as passive, although I don't particularly like that term very much. But certainly some resistance was more violent and some resistance was non-violent. I want to read for you something to start with. It's a discussion taking place between a slave master and one of his slaves named Pompey. So Pompey and the master are talking, and the master turns to Pompey and says, "Pompey, how do I look?" "Oh, massa, mighty." "What do you mean, mighty, Pompey?" "Why, massa, you look noble." "What do you mean by noble?" "Why, sir, you just look like one lion." "Why, Pompey, where have you ever seen a lion?" "I see one down yonder field the other day, massa." "Pompey, you foolish fellow, that was a jackass." "Was it, massa? Well, you look just like him." That is just to start us off, but to get into the idea, the whole notion that enslaved Africans and also indigenous Americans in the Caribbean never accepted their enslavement passively. They sought all types of ways to escape the impositions that were being placed on them. And maroonage is one of those things, and that is what we're going to be focusing on in greater emphasis today. Maroonage spans the whole history of European colonization in the Caribbean. Within a decade of Columbus reaching the Caribbean, you probably had the first Maroons. And up until the middle of the 20th century, the last living Cuban Maroon was still alive. So we're talking about a history of maroonage that spans 4 centuries probably. Definitions of what exactly Maroons are varies because the origins of all of these Maroon groups also vary. I don't know what happened there. But generally the Maroons consist of groups or communities of indigenous and African peoples who escaped bondage and established viable communities in various parts of their territories, and who fought hard to maintain their hard-won freedom. That will soon be back up, don't worry about it. There are various theories about how the word maroon came about, but it is believed to derive from the Spanish cimarron, which you may have heard before, and you may have heard that the whole word cimarron was a Spanish word meaning wild. But really, that word cimarron is believed actually to come from a Taino or Arawak root word, and was at first applied to the domestic cattle that had taken to the hills in Hispaniola. And later, cimarron was used to apply to Tainos, who themselves had escaped enslavement from the Spaniards and gone into the hills. But by the end of the 1530s, you see the word taking on connotations of meaning fierce, wild, unbroken, and by this time was being used to refer primarily to African American runaways. For more than 4 centuries, as I said, these communities formed by such escaped slaves dotted all over plantation America. These new societies range from tiny bands that survive less than a year to powerful states encompassing thousands of members that survive for generations and even centuries. We may be familiar with the Jamaican Maroons, but Maroon societies were formed all over the Caribbean. They had Maroon societies in Suriname, in French Guiana, in Colombia, in Belize off the coast of Central America, in Mexico, in Colombia, in Panama, in Brazil, in Cuba, and in northern Mexico, well, what is today the United States of America, but what was then northern Mexico. Why is it important for us to understand the Maroons? A number of reasons that I have here. First of all, Maroons were in the forefront of resistance to slavery. They were among the first pioneers to explore and to adapt remote places in both American continents and the Caribbean. And I suppose in saying both American continents, I'm including North and Central America and South America. They are among the first to resist colonial domination and to strive for independence. a lot of persons mention Haiti as being the first independent black state in the New World, but if you think about it, a number of Maroon groups actually were operating as independent communities, almost states within states, even before the Haitian Revolution at the end of the 19th century. Another very important reason for us to study Maroons is what they represent culturally. A major part of the oppression of slavery was not just the restriction of persons' movement, but also restriction of these groups' culture and heritage. And within the slave plantations, enslaved Africans had very little freedom of expression. Maroon groups, because of their independence, had a rare freedom to develop and transform all of those memories of Africa, all of those aspects of their cultural heritage. And in some ways, these Maroon societies, because of this fidelity to their African traditions, represent almost unique cultural groups within the Caribbean. So it's very important that we study those groups because we can learn a lot about our culture. All right, let us look at some of the groups that started to appear. As I said initially, a number of the first Maroons were just individuals who ran away. One of the most important factor that would have given rise to Maroon groups or to maroonage would be, of course, the availability of space. Initially, there was a lot of space in all of the Caribbean territories, and not just talking in the Caribbean Sea, but also, as I said, the countries lying in the Caribbean, from North America, Central America, going right down to South America. And initially, a number of the runaways would just have been individuals who were trying to escape slavery. I want to read to you the account of one of these individuals, just a brief passage. And it really speaks to people's determination to escape from bondage. And this is the story of Zabeth. The events described here took place in western Saint-Domingue, which is modern Haiti, between January and April 1768, by which time Zabeth had become a regular deserter. From early childhood, she had lived the life of a fugitive, and with age had become more prone to flight. Her master had therefore chained her to prevent further escapes, but had become anxious lest she should die from having been in chains for a very long time, so he released her. 2 days later, she absconded again, but was caught shortly after. On this occasion, her manager let her off with a stern warning that if she should escape again, he would put her back in chains for the rest of her life. She promised him solemnly that she would mend her ways, but in an instant she was off again. She was apprehended and returned to him shortly after, but she was not in a physical condition to undergo punishment, so he decided to send her to a place where, according to him, some disabled blacks lived in virtual freedom. She has absconded again within 2 days. When she was caught again, he chained her this time in the sugar mill, where she remained for the next month. While there, 3 of her fingers were crushed in the rollers. He therefore placed her in hospital without removing her heavy chains. But within 8 days, she had run off again, having scaled a high fence that enclosed the hospital. Yet again, she was caught and kept chained for about a month, by which time she showed signs of being at death's door because of the long period in chains. He conspired with some persons to request that her master should remove her chains, which he did after causing her grave to be dug. This did not deter her for long, for she was soon off again. As before, she was apprehended, and seeing that she was at the point of death, the manager indicated that he intended to chain her in the hospital, where it would be more convenient for her to die than in the hospital. And it is likely that she did die there shortly thereafter. But this just really speaks to the dedication and determination of certain persons to escape from enslavement. As I said, initially some of these groups would have been very small, but there are other larger groups. You may have, or probably would have heard of the Bushinenge, also called the refugee blacks or Guyana Maroons. And these are descendants. Morning to you, that's coming in. And these are the descendants of black slaves brought as plantation laborers from Africa to Suriname in northeastern South America, starting the last half of the 17th century. The ancestors of the major Bushinenge tribes escaped from the plantations of coastal Suriname to the forests of the interior and in the late 17th and 18th centuries. There they developed distinctive societies reflecting a blending and adaptation to local